Okay, welcome back. We are going to move forward with video number 4. And in this video, we're going to talk specifically about the network infrastructure required for our deployment of ADFS. The network infrastructure requires a number of components, and so I want to show sort of what we're going to build out just to give a visual here. What we see here is in the green box represents a vNet in Azure that's going to have an IP range. Within that IP range, I am carving out two subnets, the blue box production and the red box DMZ. For each of those, I'm also going to deploy an NSG, that is a network security group. Those security groups will provide rules for inbound and outbound traffic to those subnets and therefore provide a layer of security. Also on this, you can see an internal load balancer in the blue box. That's going to be used to load balance incoming traffic to ADFS servers. And then on the inside the red box is an internet load balancer, which will be used to balance incoming traffic from the internet to our web application proxy servers. Across the bottom here, I have listed what rules we're going to define for our DMZ and our production subnets, but we'll go through that specifically in this demo. So let's go ahead and get started by getting to the portal. Here I am in the Adfs Deployment resource group that we created during the storage video just a little bit ago. And you can see here that I've gone ahead and created my second storage account, Adfs edu02. So let's get started here. The first thing we're going to deploy is the vNet itself. So I'm just going to click on New. Then I'm going to There's a number of ways that as we've seen that I can do this. I could search for vNet there, or I could just go down here to networking, and I can see virtual network listed here. So let's go ahead and choose that. All right, so all the things that we've talked about and that we're doing during these demos is all in Resource Manager using the new capabilities of Azure Resource Manager. And so the first thing we're going to get here is a form to fill out for our EDU vNet. So I'm going to name this one EDU Nets just to match up with the drawing I just showed. And I'm going to change the subnet address or the IP range to 172.16.60.0/ and I'm going to use a 16 network. The default subnet doesn't really mean anything except it's the first subnet that gets created. It can be just like all other subnets otherwise. I'm going to name the first one production, and I'm going to put in 172.16.1.0/24 for the range of addresses for this subnet. It's going to go into my subscription that I use for all of my demos. I'm going to click on the Adfs Deployment resource group. Everything I'm deploying in this demo is West US2, and I'm going to click on Create here. All right, so that's going to define the actual VNet and the first subnet. So let's go back to our resource groups here and click on Adfs Deployment. And we'll see that that VNet is going to be sitting right next to our storage accounts. I need to go ahead and add another subnet to that VNet, so I'm going to click on it. And here on the right, you're going to see that I have a number of options that I can configure for this VNet. I'm going to click on Subnets, and I'm going to add my DMZ subnet. So I'm just going to call it DMZ. I'm going to change the range to 172.16.2.0/24. And I'm not going to add a security group yet because I don't have one. We're going to come back and do that next. So I'm going to click OK here. The other thing I'm going to go ahead and do here, even though it's not part of my environment here, is I'm going to click on Add Gateway Subnet. If I add a gateway subnet, that's basically a subnet that Azure will create for us. We can't change the name, and it will be used for connectivity through ExpressRoute or site-to-site VPN. So we'll go ahead and get that in place, and I left the first 0.0/24 range available for that because I just like my gateways to be lower numbers. I'm going to click OK, and that subnet is also being created. Okay, so at this point we've created our VNet and our subnets. The next step is to create our network security groups to sort of protect our traffic flow between our networks. So I'm going to go back here, go to networking. Actually, if I look down here, I can see that I have a shortcut to it right away. So I'm just going to click this one. I'm going to use Resource Manager. And for this network security group, the first one we'll create will be for the production subnet. Of course, everything goes into my same resource group in this case. And I'm going to click Create. And while that's going, let's just go ahead and create the second network security group since we're in the flow of things here. And we're going to call this one NSG-DMZ. And this will be the network security group that protects the DMZ traffic. Same choices as before. Okay, so now the whole goal of these network security groups, and I've actually created a shortcut here for my network security groups, but I'm going to go directly to the resource group so you can see all of the objects I've created so far. And we can see here that we have the vNet itself and two objects called NSG-DMZ and NSG-prod. Let's go into prod first because we have a number of rules we want to create for this. First thing we want to do is we're going to associate this, by the way, with the production subnet, and we're going to associate the NSG-DMZ with the DMZ subnet. These network security groups can also be targeted to specific virtual machines, so I just wanted to mention that as well. Okay, now we're on the properties of our production network security group, and I'm going to define some inbound security rules. First thing I want to show here is that we have this little button here called default rules, and it looks like an I with a slash through it. That's because we're hiding those rules. If I click on that, you can see all the rules that are defined by default, and you can see a priority. Priority is basically in what order that rules are applied. Rules are always applied from lowest to highest priority, and if a rule is met, then the rest of them are skipped. So we exit out of the processing. That's quite useful for us because we're going to put rules in lower levels that will override higher level rules for certain communication. So if I click on Add here, the first thing I want to do is allow HTTPS traffic inbound from the DMZ. So I'm going to name it that, allow inbound from DMZ. I'm going to make this a priority of 100. And I want this to, it's all about the DMZ, so I'm actually going to define the DMZ subnet range, 172.16.2.0/16. And I'm going to choose HTTPS, which is right here. And I'm going to allow. So this is going to allow HTTPS traffic that comes in from 172.16.2.0 subnet. I made a little bit of a mistake there, so let me change that to 24 and click OK. Okay, so in other words, if traffic comes in from the 172.16.2.0/24 or our DMZ subnet to anything in the destination network, then using service HTTPS, then we're going to allow. And if that happens, then the rest of the rules are skipped because we found a rule that matched. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to add another rule. This one's going to deny all inbound from the DMZ. And what we can see here, I'm going to just name it that, deny all inbound DMZ. I want to give this one a priority of 110. I always leave some space in between in case I need to do something different. I'm going to choose, again, a target of that subnet. And for this one, I'm going to say custom. And for protocol, I'm going to put a star in here. And I'm going to say deny. So what we're effectively doing here is we're going to deny all traffic from the DMZ subnet. So if I click OK, Because that is rule 110, it will never be evaluated as true for HTTPS traffic because we allowed that in rule 100. So you can see how that sort of works. Finally, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another rule to block all outbound traffic to the internet because I don't want my production subnet to have any access to the internet unless it's through my internal routing mechanisms. So I'm going to say deny all outbound internet. I'm going to make this a priority of, let's just say 200 because maybe I want to leave a lot of extra space in there for things that I might do to adjust. Now in this case, I'm not going to use the CIDR block. I'm going to use a tag because we have a tag that's specific to internet. So Azure's smart enough to know what internet means, anything that's not defined within our vNets or that is known about our on-premises network. And I'm going to say custom, and I'm going to put a star in here and deny. Okay, so I'm denying all traffic to the internet. Now, I actually made a little bit of a mistake there, which I'm glad I did because it's a good a lesson to learn. And that is that I said deny all outbound to internet on an inbound rule. Well, that's not going to work for me. So you can see here I have outbound security rules as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to my outbound security rules. I'm going to try this again. Deny all outbound to internet. I'm going to put 200 in there again because I still want to leave some space. I'm going to choose tag internet custom star and click on deny. Okay, so anything going to the internet, I'm denying. And then I'm going to go back to my inbound security rules and I'll clean up this rule because what this rule effectively was saying is anything coming from the internet is denied. Well, the good news is that's already the case because we have this other rule down at the bottom that is the default rule that says deny all inbound, which covers not only the internet but all other potential connections as well. So I am going to delete this rule and clean that up effectively. Okay. Now, the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create some rules for my DMZ network security group. And those rules will be only inbound rules. I'm basically going to allow HTTPS inbound from the internet and HTTPS inbound from my production subnet. So let's go through this. It'll be very similar to what we've done already. So allow HTTPS from internet. I want to say a priority of 100. I'm going to use a tag here for internet. And then I'm going to choose my HTTPS. And that should automatically adjust to 443. I'm going to click OK there. Now, certainly, I'm giving some examples here. In your organization, you may have a number of other rules that you want to implement. So you can see here how it is done. You have all sorts of granularity and capability, but this should give you a good foundation of how to set up your ADFS infrastructure in a general sort of way. So I'm also going to allow HTTPS from production. Okay. I'm going to leave that priority. I'm going to choose a CIDR block here, and I'm going to enter my production subnet, and I'm going to choose HTTPS. Okay, so our network security groups are created and modified. The next thing I'm going to do is assign them to my subnets. And we're getting pretty close to moving on to our load balancers here. So let me go into my EDU nets. And let's click on our subnets. First one we'll assign is the production subnet. And you can see here that one of the options is network security group. So I'm just going to click on network security group. And I'm going to choose my DMZ prod here and then save. So that's how you assign those network security groups to subnets. If we were inside of a virtual machine and we're looking at the IP interface or the network interface, we could also assign these NSGs to those interfaces specifically. Next thing I want to do is assign the NSG to my DMZ subnet. Effectively, I'm creating the barriers here by adding these. Okay. So now with that complete, we are going to move on to our load balancers. So we have two load balancers we're going to create here. We can't finalize the creation of them until we get our virtual machines, but we can get a good ways into the configuration. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click on New. I'm going to go to Networking. And I'm going to find my load balancer here. So we have a load balancer right here in the purple. And we're going to define this one as the, let's do the internal load balancer first. So this is going to be our internal load balancer for ADFS. So I'm going to click on internal here. That means it's not going to get a public facing IP address. And I'm going to choose the virtual network where I want this load balancer to be placed, EDUnets, and also the subnet. So this load balancer will be servicing the production subnet and therefore get an IP address from that subnet. I can choose dynamic or static assignment. I'm going to choose a static assignment just because I like static. I'm going to choose 172.16.1.10. Now that static address will be set aside so that in the future when I deploy virtual machines with dynamic addresses in the subnet, if I choose to do that, they will not be able to get that address. That's quite obvious, but I just wanted to mention it. Okay, this load balancer is going to go into the Adfs Deployment resource group, and I'm going to click Create. All right, let's also go ahead and create the load balancer for our external facing web application proxy servers. So I'm going to choose load balancer right here from my recent list. We're going to call this one external LB WAP. All right, this is going to be public. Because it's public, I have to actually choose a public IP address, and because I don't have one, I'm going to create one. So let's go ahead and create that public IP address. Let's give it a name of edu WAP external. I'm going to leave this one as dynamic. You can choose static for that as well. I'm going to click OK there, and now you can see it's going to add that as the public load balance endpoint. I'm going to put it in my Adfs Deployment group here and click Create. All right, now with those being created right now, I'm going to click on my load balancer shortcut over here that I have set aside. And let's first go to our internal load balancer because it's already finished. And I'm just going to do a few things here really quickly, and then we're going to have to finish configuring this once our virtual machines are in place. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a probe. Now the probe basically is going to be the method that is used to determine if a service is available. I'm going to click on Add. And this probe is going to basically probe my ADFS servers. So I'm going to say ADFS probe. I'm going to change this to TCP in this case because I'm using port 443. I'm going to choose an interval. So how many seconds do I wait between probes? And then at what point do I mark a service unhealthy? So this says two consecutive failures, so basically 10 seconds of an outage. Of course, you have the ability to change those, but I'm going to leave them as default. The other things we're going to create later on are the background pool or backend pool configuration, which is where we define our virtual machines. So let's back out of this load balancer. I'm going to refresh. I should have a second one now. So my external load balancer. I'm going to do two things on this load balancer. I'm going to configure its probe as well in the same way because it's the same port. We're going to use HTTPS TCP. So we're just going to call this one edu WAP probe TCP 443, leaving the defaults for intervals and marking unhealthy. Finally, let's go back to our resource groups. And let's click on Adfs Deployment. You can see all the objects we've created so far. We're basically creating sort of the skeleton network infrastructure for our deployment. What I want to do is come back into this public IP address, and I want to basically check out its DNS configuration. So how do I know what this public IP address is? I can look at it, but what I want to do is give it an IP address here. So, or I'm sorry, a name. So let's just call this edu WAP LB. Okay. Now that's going to be in the .westus2.cloudapp.azure.com, but later on you can associate an external DNS name with this name. So let me just change that up a little bit. We're getting a little bit of a complaint here. And it's because I think I'm in all uppercase. So let's call this edu WAP LB. All right, so no uppercase. This is going to be the DNS name that exists for Azure, and then you can create a CNAME later on for your actual Federation services that points to this name. Okay, so with that, we have created most of our networking infrastructure. We'll come back when we create our virtual machines as part of that process, setting up those back-end pools for our load balancers. So let's move on to video number 5, setting up our virtual machines.